my background, I should introduce myself, is as a parasitologist. I worked 25 years in tropical medicine in the London School of Hygiene, Tropical Medicine, in the Liverpool School, in Australia at Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, in Imperial College in London, in South Sudan, under harsh conditions. And what you find, I was working a lot of that time on a disease called onchocerciasis, river blindness. It's a small field. Small fields have their own characteristics, really have their own characteristics. And from time to time, funders would engage with that small field that I was in and bring to bear, quite significant cultural tone. But they could only work with what they had. When I went to Wellcome, it's because I really wanted to sort of get a broader view than I was able to do as a researcher. 25 years in research, I was really hunkered down on developmental genes in a nematode parasite. That's what I did. And now I get to look at lots of fields. It's really interesting. When I first went to Wellcome, I went to a frog meeting. They're really interesting people because they come from two fields. Those who have come from all over the place, different disciplines, and they worked with Xenopus laevis, and those who are really interested in genetics only, and they chose Tropicalis. They chose Tropicalis because laevis is a pseudotetrapod, which is a real pain in the arse. So by seeing those two fields come together, you see the exchanges of what they need to trade. And they were very slow to get the frog genome sequenced by the Wellcome Trust. Very slow. Why? Because they didn't speak with one voice. The zebrafish people, and zebrafish has a stonking big genome, the zebrafish people spoke with one voice. They absolutely knew what they wanted. They knew which fish. They knew when. They were very demanding. A guy with the improbable name of Mark Fishman, who subsequently went to Novartis, came and thumped on the table, said, we need it, and we need it by tomorrow. And although it did take a while to deliver, Sanger spent a large amount of time and trouble on the zebrafish genome. C. elegans, that started off the whole of genetics, if you could probably argue, certainly was the forerunner to the Human Genome Project, was led by a small gang headed by Sidney Brenner. They exactly knew what they wanted, and they spoke with one voice. So what I want to do in this few minutes, however many, you need to tell me when to shut up, is to give you a sense, what do I think, and it's a personal perspective, it's not a Wellcome perspective, what do I think are the hallmarks that help a field prosper? What do I think I've seen from funders that is helpful? And I'll say some things about Wellcome because I guess you'll expect me to do so. So let me sort of begin with what I would class as the three secrets of success for small fields. When I went to Australia, I was at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, the basic science lab, it's a good lab. They said to me, the trouble with your field is, talking about my time in onchocerciasis, I was actually working on malaria there. They said, the trouble with your field is if you do an experiment, it takes forever for somebody to repeat it and debunk it. And they were right. I used to work with really difficult parasite and the difficult conditions, Sierra Leone, Sudan and places like that. And it would take years for anyone to get around to repeating the experiment. So if I foul up and publish something wonky, it's in the literature for a long time. So collaborations and willingness to repeat work in a way that does critically look at the authenticity of the outcomes is key. That exchange just on the dog trail, absolutely classic. There was a discussion I was in not that long ago about group A streptococci, and the whole field had been crushed by a really bad trial done at the NIH 20 years earlier. There was a safety flag came up in that trial, and the whole field was stymied by this. It was a poor trial design, they had trouble with execution, it should never have been allowed to sit there blocking people, and eventually at great cost it was repeated and found that there wasn't really a basis for the safety signal at all. So, I think the answer to that last exchange is, for God's sake, do the experiment. And the question about what's mutually exclusive or not, that's a really interesting discussion, because in small fields at early stage there's usually a number of threads that need to be pursued. So I hope what I'm talking about will resonate well, because I believe you're at the stage of the meeting that you think about next steps. I would like to maybe just give a sense of then the other things that I think help a field. So one that really helps is to speak with one voice as a field, to funders, to key stakeholders. You might have to work hard to agree what those things are. They're usually things that facilitate broadly. I know you've had the discussion about registries. That seems, completely in line with that kind of thinking. But also, it's when you decide you're going to have more than one line of attack on a problem. At Wellcome, we're funding a number of strategies to interfere with progression of Alzheimer's disease. I think we've got 4 or 5 drug discovery projects in that area. Every one of them is underpinned by a different theory of mode of action. Every one of them. And they're going at the order of £4 million a pop. Why do we tolerate that? Because truth is we don't know what the right answer is. And so long as the trial design means that you'll learn something from it, Wellcome is up for that. So that's the first point I'd make. You can have a strategy, you can speak with one voice, and you don't have to agree there's only one way to do it. The second thing that really helps is a field that's bigger than itself. The problem with small fields is that they're small. 7% of us will have problems with a rare disease. 7% is a big number compared with what I understand is ballpark 3,000 known cases of Alport syndrome at this time, or in registries at the moment. So 7% cumulatively of the world's population are going to be bedeviled with some form of rare disease. So in aggregate, there's something enormous there. And many of those have genetic origins. So are there things that one can do which is bigger than the field itself? Gene therapy, for example, if you're working on the principles of therapy, on some of the risks associated with gene therapy, on the tools of the trade, on the vectors, on the methods of introduction of monitoring, on the endpoints that you can measure, those might be bigger than Alport syndrome. Those might be very big questions that could benefit multiple fields. Don't know how many engineers are here in the room. If you're an engineer, would you mind just holding your hand up? So there's, yeah, so what? Yeah, okay. So that's really interesting too. Many fields I've gone to that have really decided on how they're going to work together. They suddenly find they've got lots of outsiders. I'm an outsider here, but I'm nearly always an outsider in people's meetings nowadays. That's the fun and nature of my job. But when I was working in onchocerciasis, some of the funders used to regularly get outsiders in. And the outsiders could be because of the discipline, or could be because of the subject area they currently worked in. And they can bring really astonishingly important perspectives. Cancer's therapy is being transformed by engineers in the last few years. So I think it's really worth thinking how to make the field bigger than itself, either because the technology is bigger than the syndrome, or because you're looking at a terrifically important class of protein. Collagens are enormously important, extremely lucrative to the beauty industry, for God's sake. There's all sorts of reasons I worked on collagens because I was working on a nematode. So collagens are much bigger than Alport syndrome, of course, and we've got one example. Carl was saying he was coming from left field working on collagens into seeing this syndrome. So however you set it scientifically or technologically, if you can set your sail bigger than the field itself, then that's pretty important. If C. elegans, a soil nematode, can be as famous today as it is, it's because it wasn't some soil biologist working on it. They saw it as a model organism to inform the entire lineage of a multicellular beast. The third form of success, and I'm going to block now and consult my phone on which I've written my notes. This is not me checking my email. The third form of success is to under-promise and over-deliver. So that exchange, when will there be good outcomes for patients? What will those outcomes look like? Very sort of tempered, cautious kind of response. The vision needs to be really clear. The urgency needs to be built into a schedule. The realism of what that means needs to be blunt, really honest. But I don't know whether you're at that stage. So let me move on from the three forms of success to what I've seen other agencies do well. When I was working as a parasitologist in onchocerciasis, a group called the Edna McConnell Clark Foundation stepped into the ring. This is a small charity based on the Avon Cosmetics company, has many family members, based in New York in 3000 Park Avenue, for goodness sake. I used to go there as an advisor to their task force 4 times a year for 10 years. And for 10 years, they decided they would step into the ring and try and do something about onchocerciasis. Why? Wasn't terribly clear to me. They took what they thought were sort of underprivileged groups who were in trouble, and they would choose a cause for a time-limited period, push hard on it, and then move on. So they said, we'll come in this field for 10 years, use us while we're available. And they were transformative, really transformative. They organised the community around creating a vaccine for onchocerciasis. As it was probably a mission that was not going to succeed because it was a very tall order, but the progress of the field was huge. There were major advances in drug therapy on the back of chasing the vaccine, for example. What they did was get people together in the manner that you are meeting now. What they did was create a common vision and purpose. What they did was create platforms that enabled. So many of the labs did not have access to an animal model. They got one through the program. They didn't have access to materials from patients in places like Sierra Leone, Liberia, South Sudan. These are tough places to work. They got access to the materials through the program. They didn't have immunocytochemistry in some labs and needed it. They got it through the program. They didn't have a way to collectively test antigens. They got trials that combined all of the materials collected from the program into 2 reference laboratories that did evaluation. 2 because they were to cross-check each other. So that was a really very potent thing they did, and they did it with small money. I mean, I think it was in the order of $15 million a year, $20 million a year. But of course, all the investigators who benefited were applying for NIH grants, for Wellcome grants, for whatever. They were all going to their various funding agencies on the back of the facilitation that the Clark Foundation provided. So that was powerful. I'll give you another example of what I think is a powerful approach that the Medical Research Council in the UK took, which was discipline hopping, giving people the opportunity to come into a field, look in, look, see, make a contribution. We funded through my division at Wellcome a number of people who've been on those discipline hopping. Yeah, they'd get a year out. Usually a physicist coming in or a mathematician coming into somebody else's field in biology or medicine. We've had a number of inventions that have been commercialized on the back of people who've done that. So in a field like this, with the kinds of subjects you're talking about, I think engineers and physics are going to be really important because you're going to have data that needs analysing. it's going to be dirty data. It's going to be really difficult, I imagine, because there's a large number of imponderables. And in the break before I came into the meeting, you know, I understand there is discussion to really try and use data very proactively. So you're in a chase with lots of other groups. How will you distinguish yourself will be how savvily you use data, how integrated the effort is. We're funding a number of groups who are doing big data kind of challenges, some of them in this city of Oxford, some of them at the Sanger Institute, some of them elsewhere. There's a lot of learning to be done, and I don't think you have to do it all yourselves. So small fields, I would say, associate yourself with big players who you interest in your problem. And the key is what will make your problem interesting to them. Let me say something about Wellcome, because I really want to leave time for discussion. Nothing I'm meaning to say here is to sort of say there are easy solutions, but there are some very obvious untouched areas. One is at Wellcome, I think one of the good things we've done is take a fairly holistic approach to science and technology and society. So it's great to see over here on the left-hand side, as they sketch, they don't even know I'm talking about them, but the two women there who are producing what looks like a really interesting depiction of the people and the discussion that's taken place here. We have a group at Wellcome that's concerned with medical humanities and public engagement. And the reason it's important to Wellcome is because science happens in a society. And to do it to a society believing science isn't a cultural expression of the society is nonsense. If you've got a strong focus on patients, it's a double nonsense. But, you know, essentially having a good communication with your stakeholders is really key. And I think Wellcome has tried hard to make that bit work. Not in itself, but through the people it funds. The second thing that I think Wellcome's made a decent stab at is trying to connect science across the industry, the public sector, and the not-for-profit. It doesn't matter which sector one is in. For many charities, it's a big, big problem. Can you be seen to work with the industry? I've got a team in tech transfer in my division of 5 lawyers, and their job is not to protect me against harm or the Wellcome Trust. It's to make possible, to find reasons to be able to say yes. Yes to tackling problems that need us to do unusual things. So we fund through my division, as we do translational work, 1/3 of the awards go to companies. Some of those companies are as large as GE Healthcare, Pfizer, GSK. These are big companies. Some of them are small as brand new, wet behind the ears university startups. Some of them are not-for-profits. Some of them are public-private partnerships that are established with other people's sponsorship. And of course, a lot of academic labs. The reason we do that is because the lawyers have found a way for us to balance the conflicts of interest, the personal gain that might be made by shareholders and what have you. We've found a solution. Don't want to bore you with what the solution looked like, but we've found it. We have a regulator, the Charity Commission, that's very comfortable with the solutions we've found. What it's allowed us to do is to get on with the business of chasing science opportunities wherever it sits. And in many cases, it's partnerships between the public and private sector that really make a difference. So I think that continuum of science has really helped us. And there are some rare conditions that the industry does tackle under its heading of specialty medicine. I know that there are many companies interested in gene therapy simply wanting to work on the platform technologies but not wanting to take the risk themselves, not being able to justify the risk on any particular disease, but interested in aggregate about what doors could be opened. And there is lots of opportunity through a number of our schemes for the kinds of work I imagine you want to do. So Wellcome's got a big basic science agenda. We spend something like £700 million a year on research. It's from an asset base of £16 billion and it's designed to be sustainable. So we spend sort of 4.7% of the asset base. We have a very gifted investment team. We don't raise that money. That's money that's invested diversely. So we take a long-term view of what we're trying to support. And basic science probably accounts for about 70% of all the funding we go in for. So we have a healthy respect for the need to understand the problem you're tackling. It sounds like you've got questions yet to answer. That's good. The second part of our agenda is public engagement, a society which is engaged, understands, is not preached to, but understands what the problem is you're tackling, and I spoke about that briefly before. And the third, technology transfer, is my division that we established 10 years ago that funds basically research intended to produce products with utility. Not by taking all the journey, but taking it sufficiently far that market forces will pick up and run with it. So this is the third division, funding division, and the most recent, been established since 2003, just celebrated its 10th birthday, had the princely sum of £8 million a year to spend in its first year, but it's more like 80 now. Collectively, we've spent something like £500 million on tech transfer funding. We are gap funders looking for other people to follow. So we look at what funding did people get on the back of our support. That's just gone over £1 billion. So, you know, there's £1.5 billion worth of research out there being done as a function of this. So there's some leveraging effect. 15 products on the market, mainly in software and devices at this stage. Some very fundamental trials underway just now. One of the trials through a scheme we have called the Health Innovation Challenge Fund is happening out of this city. So Robert McLaren, who's an ophthalmologist, works with the Moorfields Hospital and Oxford University, where he's appointed, is doing gene therapy in a disease called choroideremia. Relatively rare condition, results from a chaperone-type protein going AWOL, a deletion, causing retinal epithelium to deteriorate over time, and blindness in sort of late adolescence, early adulthood. He's injecting his constructs into the retinal epithelium, or into a bubble just below the retinal epithelium. And he's doing unilateral experiments, so he has a control eye in the way ophthalmologists do. I think you have a control. Last time I counted, I had 2 kidneys. So his trial design sort of, comes as a given. It's got the safety built into it. You do one at a time. His choroideremia experiments are done coded, blinded. I try to avoid the pun, but it didn't stop the Daily Mail publishing one of his patients saying, "Doctor, I've got my sight again," because some of the patients are declaring that they're seeing benefits already. It's a miracle that gene therapy is now gaining some momentum after being in the doghouse for many years after the scary results in some of the trials that were conducted 2 decades ago. So, I think what we will see is probably interesting things happen there. But that further discussion about what can you do outside of that, perhaps through small molecule work, that's really important too. And it will be biologicals as well as white powder that are probably going to play a hand. Engineering could well play a hand if you're willing to. The conversation about transplants versus gene therapy was really interesting, because there is a pragmatic, practical voice saying, haven't you already got something that's really working well? Well, on the one hand, maybe yes, you could have an engineer build over time, a kidney that sufficed. There's people certainly trying to do that too. But gene therapy is going to play its part somewhere. And stopping bad things happening in complex genetic diseases is the only way many of the problems will be stopped, which is where the white powder and biologics sort of supplementation comes in. So I think that discussion just before I stepped up here was really meaningful, because your strategy needs to, I would argue, needs to build in the resilience to be bold and brave and lead fields, because you might be able to do something important in this field which can't be done in others. The ophthalmologists definitely lead the charge in many CNS disorders simply because of their access to the organ and because they've got two of them, so they can do good controlled experiments. So you maybe have opportunities if trial design and clinical endpoints can work well for you in lots of different intervention strategies. So I won't labour it, I don't want to talk too long. I wanted to not get you snarled up on PowerPointy type slides, because I think the key is this is a conversation that you will have amongst yourselves and reach conclusions. Welcome through its translational division, through my division, funds internationally, funds in the order of tens of thousands of pounds to millions of pounds, funds trials through to basically first in man, going backwards to sort of first in man, funds across all the disciplines. Most of the inventors on the ideas that come out of our research are not from clinicians or biologists. Nearly all the names on the patents are chemists, physicists, engineers, because they are the ones that produce the inventive step. Most of the people in the room are probably the ones who set the exam question, but some of the inventive step will come from people that you recruit to your cause, and they will be from the physical sciences and engineering as likely as not, if you follow the course of many other fields. And the leverage effect you might have could be measured in all sorts of ways. So we launched something called Pathfinder Awards, small awards for rare diseases, specifically for rare diseases. We're massively undersubscribed. These are just £100,000 a pop, and you get them with a fairly light touch review mechanism. You have to have a commercial partner. So the idea is it's an academic lab pairs up with a commercial partner to have a go at something. And it's deliberately intended to try and get the industry interested in working on specialty diseases. When we launched this, the EMEA said, please work on the rare disorders, not the common rare disorders, the household name rare disorders. So, what you might want to do is win over the regulator too. The regulator is really interested to help rare diseases. And if you find a way to have a sympathetic tone with regulation, to have more of a conversation than a diktat, you will find you've got commercial partners sitting at your shoulder. They'll be really interested in that. So I'll leave it at that, and hopefully I've provoked some questions, if nothing else, because you'll tell me I deeply misunderstand the challenges you face. Thank you.